Bill, Daniel, and Chris sat in the small forest clearing, their breaths still heavy from the run. The moon hung high in the sky, casting a pale light over the trees. Bill looked down at Chris, who lay at his feet, his golden fur glistening in the moonlight. The dog's eyes were alert, his ears twitching at every sound. Daniel sat nearby, his face grim as he scanned the trees for any sign of danger. "We can't stay here long," Daniel said, his voice low. "They'll find us." Bill nodded, his mind racing. He thought about Tom, about the man who had once been Chris's owner, and about the betrayal that had brought them all to this point. But before he could say anything, the sound of footsteps made them all freeze. Chris's ears perked up and a low growl rumbled in his chest. "Someone's coming," Daniel whispered, his hand reaching for a rock. But as the figure emerged from the trees, Bill's heart sank. It wasn't one of the men chasing them. It was Marie. Marie looked different from the last time Bill had seen her. Her blonde hair was disheveled, and her face was pale, her eyes filled with a mix of fear and regret. She stopped a few feet away, her hands raised in a gesture of peace. "Bill," she said, her voice trembling, "I need to talk to Tom. Please, where is he?" Bill stood, his body tense. "Tom's not here," he said, his voice cold. "And even if he was, I don't think he'd want to see you." Marie flinched, but she didn't back down. "I know I made a mistake," she said, her voice breaking. "I know I hurt him, but I need to make things right. Please, Bill, I need to talk to him." Daniel stepped forward, his eyes narrowing. "This isn't the time for this," he said sharply. "We're in the middle of something here, and we don't have time for your drama." Marie's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't argue. Instead, she reached into her pocket and pulled out a small, folded piece of paper. "I found this," she said, holding it out to Bill. "It's from Tom. He left it for me before everything happened. I think it might help you." Bill hesitated, then took the paper. He unfolded it and scanned the words, his heart sinking as he read. It was a note from Tom, written in a shaky hand. "Marie, I know what I did was wrong, but I need you to know that I never stopped loving you. And if something happens to me, please take care of Chris. He's all I have left." Bill looked up at Marie, his expression softening. "Why are you showing this to me now?" he asked. Marie wiped her eyes. "Because I think Tom's in trouble," she said, "and I think you're the only one who can help him." Before Bill could respond, the sound of a twig snapping made them all turn. Chris let out a low growl, his body tense. Daniel grabbed Bill's arm. "We need to go," he said urgently. "Now." Marie stepped forward, her eyes pleading. "Please, let me come with you," she said. "I can help. I know things that might help you find the truth." Bill hesitated, then nodded. "Fine," he said, "but you need to keep up. And if you slow us down, we're leaving you behind." Marie nodded, her expression determined. "I understand." As they moved through the forest, Bill's mind raced. He thought about Tom, about the note, and about the danger that surrounded them. But most of all, he thought about Chris, the dog who had been abandoned, who had found a home with Bill, and who was now at the center of a dangerous game. They reached a small stream and followed it downstream, the sound of the water masking their footsteps. But the men chasing them were relentless, and it wasn't long before they were closing in. Daniel stopped suddenly, his eyes scanning the area. "This way," he said, pointing to a narrow path that led up a steep hill. Bill followed, his legs burning with the effort. Chris stayed close, his movements sure and steady despite the rough terrain. Marie struggled to keep up, but she didn't complain. When they reached the top of the hill, they found themselves on a rocky outcrop overlooking the forest. The moon was high in the sky, casting a silver light over the trees. "We can't keep running," Bill said, his voice breathless. "We need to face them." Daniel nodded, his expression grim. "You're right, but we need to be smart about it. We can't take them all on at once." As they spoke, The sound of footsteps behind them made them turn. A group of men emerged from the trees, their faces hidden in the shadows. One of them stepped forward, his voice cold and menacing. "Give us the dog, and we'll let you go." Bill stepped in front of Chris, his heart pounding but his voice steady. "You're not taking him." The man smirked. "You really think you can stop us?" Before Bill could respond, Chris lunged forward, his teeth bared. The men stumbled back, caught off guard by the dog's sudden aggression. Daniel took advantage of the distraction, grabbing a rock and hurling it at one of the men. The rock hit its mark, and the man fell to the ground with a cry of pain. Bill grabbed Chris's leash and pulled him back, his heart racing. "We need to go," he shouted, turning and running down the other side of the hill. Daniel and Marie followed close behind, their movements quick and sure. They ran until they reached a small clearing, their breath coming in ragged gasps. Bill leaned against a tree, his legs trembling. Chris laid down at his feet, his sides heaving. Marie collapsed to the ground, her face pale and sweaty. Daniel stood nearby, his eyes scanning the trees for any sign of danger. "We can't keep doing this," Bill said, his voice hoarse. "We need to end it, now." Daniel nodded, his expression grim. "I know, and we will. But we need to be smart about it. We need to find a way to expose them, to make sure the truth comes out." Marie looked up, her eyes filled with determination. "I can help," she said. "I know things that might help you find the proof you need." Bill looked down at Chris, his heart swelling with determination. The dog looked up at him, his eyes filled with trust and loyalty. No matter what happened, Bill knew he would do whatever it took to protect Chris, and to make sure the truth was finally revealed. Marie sat on the forest floor, her breathing slowly returning to normal. She looked up at Bill, her eyes filled with a mix of fear and determination. "I know where they keep their records," she said, her voice steady despite the exhaustion. "If we can get to them, we can expose everything." Bill frowned. "Where?" Marie hesitated, then spoke. "There's an old warehouse on the edge of town. They use it as a storage facility, but it's really where they keep all their documents. If we can get in, we can find the proof you need." Daniel stepped forward, his expression skeptical. "And how do you know this?" Marie looked down, her hands trembling. "Because I used to work for them," she admitted. "Not directly, but I was involved. I didn't know what they were really doing until it was too late. By then, I was in too deep." Bill's jaw tightened. "And now you want to help us?" Marie nodded, her eyes pleading. "I made a lot of mistakes, Bill. I hurt Tom, and I hurt you, but I can't let them keep doing this. Not to Chris, and not to anyone else." Bill exchanged a glance with Daniel, who shrugged. "We don't have many options," Daniel said. "If she's telling the truth, this could be our only chance." Bill looked down at Chris, who lay at his feet, his eyes filled with trust. The dog had been through so much, and Bill knew he couldn't let him down. "All right," he said finally, "but if this is a trap, you're on your own." Marie nodded, her expression relieved. "Thank you," she said softly. The warehouse was on the outskirts of town, a large, run-down building surrounded by a chain-link fence. The group approached cautiously, staying in the shadows as they surveyed the area. There were no guards in sight, but the place was well lit, with security cameras covering every angle. "We need to disable the cameras," Daniel said, his voice low. "If they see us coming, it's over." Marie nodded. "There's a control room on the east side of the building. If we can get in there, we can shut them down." Bill looked at her, his expression skeptical. "And how do you know that?" Marie hesitated, then spoke. "Because I used to work here," she said. "I know the layout." Bill exchanged a glance with Daniel, who nodded. "All right," Bill said, "but we need to move fast." They made their way around the side of the building, staying low to avoid the cameras. Marie led the way, her movements quick and sure. When they reached the control room, she pulled a small set of tools from her pocket and began working on the lock. After a few tense moments, the door clicked open. "Stay here," Marie said, stepping inside. "I'll be quick." Bill and Daniel waited outside, their eyes scanning the area for any sign of movement. Chris stayed close, his body tense and alert. After what felt like an eternity, Marie emerged, a small device in her hand. "Done," she said. "The cameras are down." Bill nodded, his heart pounding. "Let's go." The inside of the warehouse was dimly lit, with rows of shelves filled with boxes and crates. The group moved quickly, their footsteps echoing in the empty space. Marie led them to a small office at the back of the building, where a large filing cabinet stood against the wall. "This is it," she said, pulling open the top drawer. "Everything you need should be in here." Bill and Daniel began sifting through the files, their eyes scanning the documents for anything useful. Chris lay down by the door, his ears perked and his eyes alert. The atmosphere was tense, every sound making them jump. "Here," Daniel said suddenly, holding up a folder. "This is it. Names, dates, everything. This is the proof we need." Bill took the folder, his hands trembling as he flipped through the pages. His heart sank as he realized just how deep the conspiracy went. "We need to get this to the authorities," he said, his voice urgent. But before they could move, the sound of footsteps made them all freeze. Chris let out a low growl, his body tense. Bill turned to see a group of men standing in the doorway, their faces hidden in the shadows. "Looking for something?" one of them asked, his voice cold and menacing. Bill stepped in front of Chris, his heart pounding. "Stay back," he said, his voice steady despite the fear. The man smirked. "You really think you can stop us?" Before Bill could respond, Chris lunged forward, his teeth bared. The men stumbled back, caught off guard by the dog's sudden aggression. Daniel took advantage of the distraction, grabbing a nearby object and hurling it at one of the men. The man fell to the ground with a cry of pain. "Run!" Daniel shouted, grabbing the folder and pulling Bill toward the door. Marie followed close behind, her face pale with fear. They ran through the warehouse, the sound of footsteps echoing behind them. Chris stayed close, his movements quick and sure despite the chaos. When they reached the exit, Bill turned to Marie. "Go," he said, his voice urgent. "Get this to the authorities. We'll hold them off." Marie hesitated, then nodded. "Be careful," she said, taking the folder and running into the night. Bill, Daniel, and Chris turned to face the men chasing them, their hearts pounding but their determination unwavering. No matter what happened, they knew they had to protect the truth, and they would do whatever it took to make sure it came out. To be continued.